Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fish Tank. Now this is a very special Minion Masters meta. That's right, it's going to be the last for Minion Masters version 1. Because next month, Minion Masters 2 is launching. That's right, December the 12th, Xbox and Steam players will be on version 2.0. And we'll of course be following all the details, all the meta changes, everything here in the Fish Tank. So to make sure you don't miss out on anything, make sure you smash that subscribe button. So, what are we going to go through today? Well, as always, I've been monitoring the leaderboards this season, scraping them every day, so we get an idea of what's being played. So, yeah, without any further ado, let's have a look at that data. So, as always, the first thing we're going to do is have a look at the Minion Master popularity. So, just a reminder, we are on version 1.51.1, which is the last of the 1.x's. So here we see the overall master popularity. So we've got the bar chart, we've got the yellow, which is 1v1, the kind of reddish colour 2v2 randoms, and the blue 2v2 pre-mades. So if we just have a look at this from a bird's eye kind of point of view, we can see that APEP is by far and away the biggest played master. Now that was the case a good few seasons ago, and then APEP got some nerfs, and that changed to be Morelia, who was dominant. But interestingly, APEP, heavily the most played master, also got nerfed in the last patch. So that's interesting, because remember that his nerf was to his auto attack. So I think that goes to show that his auto attack's not really that important a part of his kit, especially in 2v2s. And his power is from his perk 1 and perk 3 free cards. Okay, so the biggest increases we've seen is it's APEP, as I said, despite the nerf, and also to King Puff, who's really performing pretty well overall. Volko, we saw a bit of a drop-off. Volko, of course, got nerfed in the last patch, perk 1, going up to 20 seconds, I think. Mordar dropping as well. No real particular reason for that, I don't think. So overall, we see APEP, Morelia, Volko, Stormbringer, and King Puff really the top 5 masters there. But let's break this down a little more and have a look at the different game modes. So we'll have 1v1 master popularity. Last season 1.51 on the left, this season 1.51.1 on the right. So we can see that APEP still is the #1 played master in solos. Milloween up to second. We're seeing a lot of Milloween, especially Milloween accursed on the solo ladder. So biggest increases we've seen to King Puff and Milloween, and biggest decreases to APEP and Wrecked. I'm not really sure what caused the Wrecked one. He did have a change fairly recently, but not in the last patch. We can see the mana cost, as always, is about the same. If you're a new player and you're thinking about what should the mana cost be, you're talking about between 3 at the cheapest and 4.5 average mana cost at the most expensive, but most decks will be about halfway between. Okay, so APEP, Milloween, Valorian as the top 3 in solos. But then if we move on to 2v2 randoms, we see APEP here on the right, the blue, absolutely dominant. Not entirely sure why he's so much more dominant in randoms. Maybe it's just more reliable, which is something that you really want from a deck. You want reliability, stuff that can carry anything in randoms, because you don't know what you're going to come up against. So big increase for APEP, and also interestingly Wrecked. But of course Wrecked, despite having a big increase, is still pretty low on the play rates. And Volko again dropping off, plus Diona for some reason. And again we see there the average mana cost is about the same, 3.8. So APEP, King Puff being really powerful in the meta at the moment, Stormbringer and Morelia, the top 4. And then if we look to pre-mades, so here we see a big increase to APEP again. APEP not as dominant at all as it was in randoms, but still the #1 played master based on our leaderboard scrapings. Kind of sounds disgusting. So APEP #1, Volko and Stormbringer. Again, King Puff seeing an uptick along with APEP, and Volko dropping off as we would expect because of the nerf. And again, Mordar dropping off as well. Not entirely sure why Mordar's seeing that drop off. Average mana cost dropping a little bit here, but again still between our 3 to 4.5 expected rate. Okay, so APEP dominant. Let's have a look at the rarity composition. This doesn't generally change from month to month, but it's always good to remind ourselves, especially if you're a newer player. A lot of people are new to the game, they always cry about pay to win. This is one of the least pay to win games I've ever played. And as you can see here, most decks are majoritively comprised of the green common cards. The easiest cards to get, the cheapest cards to craft. And the legendaries are the most... the least, I would say, the least used in the deck, as you can see here. So just a good thing to remind ourselves that most decks are mostly common with some rares and supremes and a few legendaries in there. As a reminder, legendaries in Minion Masters doesn't necessarily mean it's a strong card, it just means it's more unique. The more unique a card is, the more rare it is, going all the way up to the legendaries. Okay, so not really much change there, and that's generally the case we've seen from a long period. Right, faction composition. We've got 9 factions in the game. Which are the most played factions? Well, overall, if we look at all of the game modes, we've got Voidborn as being the most played faction, Zenshi, then Empyrean, and then Scrat. Overall, we did see Outlander dropping a little bit. Well, the biggest drop was to Outlander, and I think that was possibly due to the nerfs in the last patch. We saw nerfs to Radic, to Ruby, and to Rapid Response Reserves, which were some of the highest played Outlander cards, so people have switched away from that a little bit. So the top row is the current 1v1, 2v2 randoms and 2v2 pre-mades. The bottom row is previous seasons. Hopefully the colours are quite representative of the faction to make it kind of easier to read. I know the labels are small. Just a reminder, we do go through a lot of details here, so if you need to pause the video, screenshot it, whatever you need to do, go ahead and do it. Right, so 1v1, the biggest increase in play we saw to Accursed and Zenshi. As mentioned, we're seeing a lot more Milloween in solos, and Milloween Accursed is definitely one of the strats we've seen a lot of. And as we said, overall, Outlander dropping and Voidborn dropping there in solos. Now, so Zenshi was the dominant faction in solos, followed by Voidborn and Scrat. And then in randoms, we've got Scrat, Voidborn, Empyrean, and then Accursed. We saw an increase to Stoutheart and Accursed in randoms, and again, Outlander dropping off and Voidborn dropping off. So Scrat, Voidborn, Empyrean, Accursed. And then in pre-mades, Zenshi is the faction of choice. So these are not necessarily faction decks, they're just which cards of the faction are played the most. So Zenshi has the most play out of all of the different cards. So we did see a big increase to Zenshi in pre-mades. As you can see, last season it was 3rd played, now it's the most played. Empyrean also increasing, and again Outlander dropping, and this time in pre-made, Scrat dropping off. So, reminder, overall Voidborn, Zenshi, Empyrean, and then Scrat are the most played factions in the game. Let me know in the description what's your what's your favourite faction. Completely choked that. Right, wildcard usage. As we know, no wildcards in solos. Maybe one day we'll have all completely empty pie charts like solos. I know it's a completely pointless graph, but I like to include it. Right, so less wildcards overall. And I think that partly that's down to Fergus Flagoon Fighter having his copies removed. So you can only have one. He was very heavily wildcarded. As I mentioned before, I still like my idea of the card each season that is wildcarded the most loses. It gets punished by losing a copies allowed in the next season. And eventually we get rid of these pesky wildcards. Again, let me know what you think. I know some people love it, some people hate it. Okay, and then if we have a look at the most wildcarded cards, in randoms we've got Scrap Pack, Lost Legionnaires, Woodsman, and Lady and Frey. And then in pre-mades, we've got again Lost Legionnaires, Crystal Archers, Radic, and Scotty. Now, Lost Legionnaires were by far and away the most wildcarded card. The second place was Crystal Archers. Lost Legionnaires were wildcarded 3 times as much. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at. It's a difficult card to answer for the same mana value. Right. Let's have a look at the top cards. If you're new to Minion Masters, if you're thinking about what do I want to craft, what kind of deck do I want to play, we've got the answers for you here. We're going to look at the top cards, the top spells, the top legendaries, as well as the top decks, and this should really help you out. So this is the top cards based on play rate overall for the current season. And we can see, just to remind you, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the, or most of the decks are mostly common cards, with lesser rarities being less prevalent. Again, talking about the non-pay-to-win appeal of this game. Out of these top 27 cards, only 2 of them were legendary. 15 were common, so over half of these are common cards that are super easy to get, super easy to craft. So 15 common, 6 rares, 4 supremes, 2 legendaries. Hopefully the math adds up. So we can see this is the top overall card. So this includes everything that you can put in your deck. So minions, buildings, spells, whatever else, puffs, anything else we've forgotten. So the biggest increases we saw this season, spear throwers. They're a real staple in King Puff decks, so it could be linked to that. Fergus, despite losing his copies allowed, just the pure bulk of people playing Fergus has increased. Chain Lightning as well. Chain Lightning has always been a very heavily played spell. Remember, Cage Prowler got a nerf in the last patch, which possibly brings the Chain Lightning back into a counter because it now shuts that down. Cage Prowler takes like 92 damage or something now to shut it down. Blood Imps, we've seen a lot more of those. Remember in this patch we saw Blood Imps have their Blood Pact buffed, so only 75% master damage. Their actual damage themselves went down, but their big negative of the Blood Pact also went down. So I think that contributes to Blood Imps being far more heavily played. And the Heal Puff, of course, where there are Blood Imps, there will be the Heal Puff. And then, of course, when we talk about cards that have dropped off, we see here in 7th place, Rapid Response Reserves. We all know that was everywhere before. It was the most dominant card in the game. It was in 1st place overall, and it's had a huge drop-off. But even despite that huge drop-off, it's still in the top 7. That goes to show just how prevalent it was. Remember, the mana was increased from 2 to 3. So not everywhere, but almost everywhere still. So big nerfs to Rapid Response Reserves. Highland Huntress also really dropping out of favour. She had that range nerf down to 6, which is very, very short range. Cleaver, again, here we see the Cleaver still in 4th place overall, but it was one of the biggest decreases. So it just goes to show that it was heavily played, not as heavily played anymore, but still within the top 4. HP reduced to 550 there for the Cleaver. Annihilator and Elite Swarmer also dropping out of favour a lot. Elite Swarmer did get nerfed. And as always, we have our little competition. Can you guess, out of all of the cards, so there's like 270 cards or something, which cards were not used even a single time in my leaderboard meta-analysis? Now, there were 8 cards. I'll give you a clue. There were 8 cards that weren't played a single time. And if you were following last season's meta review video and the cards that weren't played there, all of these cards that weren't played this season were played last season. So, not to say they were played a lot, but they were played at least once. So 8 cards that weren't played. Can you guess what they are? If you do, put your guess in the comments on the YouTube vid, and if you're one of the earliest guessers, then we'll give you a little prize. So that's the 8 cards that weren't used. Can you guess what they were? Right, so those are the top cards overall. Just a reminder about the legend, the key for this. If it's green, it's a higher rank than it was last season. If it's red, it's a lower rank than it was last season. If it's white, it's the same. Sorry, if it's black, it's the same rank, and if it's white, it's a new card. And the numbers in the top left are its current rank, and the top right is its previous rank. So Scrap Pack, current rank number 1, last rank number 2. Hopefully that makes sense. Remember, screenshot these if you need to, or just pause the video, whatever, so you can fully digest it. A lot of stuff that we go through. Okay, top cards, non-spells. So this is minions, puffs, buildings, anything but spells. So we got 1v1, 2v2 randoms, and 2v2 pre-mades. And we can see that Scrap Pack is the #1 choice across all of the game modes. And that's probably the heaviest played card. Such a simple card, but really cheap. A nice number of units to help with tanking cleavers and things. You can take both bridges with them. So super cheap, convenient, valuable card. So in solos, if we look at overall the increases, Heal Puff and Blood Imps, they've really gone up. We can see there, Blood Imps #5 overall was 23rd last season. So Blood Imps going up on after that buff that they got. Also Spear Throwers up from 15th to 6th. Skeleton Crew, we don't see that in the top 9, but that went up quite a lot. And also Laser Turret there as well. And the biggest decreases in solos were the Highland Huntress, again off the back of that nerf. Assassin, Jolo, Netherbats, and Cleaver dropping off. But still there, you can see the Cleaver was one of the biggest reductions, but still in there. Top 8 was 4th. We can also see the Cage Prowler dropping off. As mentioned, it did get that nerf recently, same with the Elite Swarmer. And then if we have a look at randoms, suddenly when you get into 2v2s, AoE becomes far more important. So Fergus, for example, you don't see him in solos too much, but you definitely see him a lot in duos. Not as much as before, because of course he doesn't have his copies allowed anymore. Remember, if you check out my YouTube, there is a video where I played against a duo playing 6 of them, which was kind of crazy, but that's been ruled illegal now. So the biggest increases in randoms: Fergus, Spear Throwers, Wild Stonebjorn, Cursebearer, and Whirly Scrat. So a lot of units there that do either AoE or are good against big units. And the biggest decreases for randoms: the Elite Swarmer, Cleaver, Mana Chasers, Highland Huntress, and the Wrecked Walker. So those are the top cards for 2v2 randoms. And then if we look at the top cards for pre-mades, again, we see Fergus in there, Cleaver ever present. So a lot of these cards, you can see they are valuable and they are usable in all game modes. Again, increases for Fergus, Tantrum Throwers, Bounceberry Flingers, Crystal Arcanist, and Warrior for pre-mades. And again, Huntress dropping off, we're going to see that a lot. Annihilator, Reboomer, Blastmancer, and Scrat Tunnels. Blastmancer dropping off gives you an indication that there's not too much like fully Horde decks going on overall. So overall, the top minions, as we said: Scrap Pack, Elite Swarmer, Cleaver. These are all staples that you can fit in almost any deck, and as long as you play them properly, you can get a lot of value out of them. Right, so those are the top non-spells. Let's have a look at the top spells. So if you're wondering what kind of spells you should put in your deck, this should give you a good idea of what people are playing. And because they're from the leaderboard decks, these are what people are playing at a higher level and doing pretty well with. So again, we can see in solos, the top played card is Rapid Response Reserves. Despite having a huge reduction in play rate, it's still the most played spell. It's valuable, especially in any sort of spell synergy decks. You'll see it played a lot. Maybe the way it's played is a little bit different to how it was before, but it's still being played a lot. And then in second place, we can see Chain Lightning. That had a big increase in play rate, up from 6th to 2nd place. So big increases, as I said, for Chain Lightning, Howling Moon, Unholy Ground, Toll of the Dead, and Corpse Explosion. So that goes to show that there's a lot of Accursed decks in solos. And that's always interesting to see, because Accursed was always a 2v2 strat, and then it's become really out of favor in 2v2, but very, very strong in solos. And then reductions in play rate, as we said, big Rapid Response Reserves drop. Also drops for Future Present, Morgul's Mark, Shock Rock, and Ion Grenade. So if you're looking for spells for your solo deck, whether that's damage spells, versatility spells, this will give you a good idea of what to go with. And then in randoms, we can see Chain Lightning is the most played spell. The spells that do a lot of removal, AoE removal, become, again, much more important in randoms. So then we start seeing Bearvalanche and Rimagal's Breath. Rimagal's Breath, of course, got nerfed recently, but still pretty heavily played. It's going to get a little nerf, I think, in the next patch as well, where you can't put it on the bridges. That could reduce its play rate even further. But big increases for Chain Lightning, Unholy Ground, Poison Strike, Glen's Brew, and Harmful Souls. And decreases, as we said, for Rapid Response Reserves, Layla's Vortex, Resonating Blast Crystal, Wheel of Doom, and Arcane Bolt. I feel like Poison Strike has replaced Vortex a little bit this season for whatever reason. But here we see in randoms there's not really any unholy, accursed business, apart from Unholy Ground, which is not really an accursed deck only spell. That's a spell that you can have in any deck. And then again, similar if we have a look at randoms, Chain Lightning is top with Rimagal's Breath and Rapid Response Reserves. And again, big increases to Chain Lightning, Bearavalanche, Pincer of Dread, Rimagal's Breath, Restless Dead, and also 2v2 Premades has seen decreases for Rapid Response Reserves, Resonating Blast Crystal, Daggerfall, Mountain Gale, Dragon Ball. Nice to see Black Hole in there, always a fun spell. Bladestar getting a lot of play. Rapid Response Reserves still not everywhere, but almost. So overall, the most played spells in the game, Chain Lightning, Rapid Response Reserves, and Rimagal's Breath. So depending on the game mode you're in, these are the spells that will help you to success. Now, one of the things new players always ask is, what legendary shall I make? Reminder, legendaries are not the be-all and end-all. They're generally sort of something in a deck that you build around. But if you're desperate to spend your hard-earned shards or rubies on a legendary, then this gives you an idea of what legendaries are strong in the different game modes. Big increase for Howling Moon in solos, up from 28th to 2nd, 5-time play rate increase. So Howling Moon really getting a lot of solo play. Seen that in some accursed decks for sure. Also Jinlong, Corpse Explosion, Ardera, and Denver seeing increases in solos. So Denver did see a big increase, but it was a big increase from 0 to not 0 anymore. So whilst the increase was big, you still very rarely see him. Decreases to Jolo. Jolo really dropping off this season. Morgrul, Kurnath, Scotty. Remember, Scotty did get nerfed. I think Kurnath and Morgrul... did Morgrul? No, I think just Kurnath got nerfed in the last patch with the Elite Swarmer. Korgoth as well falling out of favour. So Korgoth falling out of favour means a lot less accursed cards. A lot less Voidborn cards, which is something we saw in the faction overview. So if you're looking for solo legendaries, those are some strong ones for you. So the top 3 there in solos, we've got Jinlong, which is one of the most played legendaries, Howling Moon, and Corpse Explosion. Now, in randoms, Fergus saw a big increase. As we saw before, it's the most played randoms legendary. Razor Squadron's gone up to 2nd from 7th place. Radic is still in the top 3. Big increases also to Lady and Frey, Wizard Puff, and Zip's Zapinator. Radic did see a reduction in play, but still heavily played. Also Wheel of Doom. Interestingly, Howling Moon seeing a decrease in play in randoms, where it's heavily played in solos, which you would expect the opposite, but the data doesn't lie. Less Reconator and Arcane Bolt being played there in randoms. And again, in Premades, Fergus is still number 1, reigning supreme. Prime Sergeant Radic as well, 2nd there. And Leilel up to 3rd from 7th previously. So Fergus is being played almost twice as much in Premades as he was previously. And Leilel, Lady and Frey, Radic, and Jinlong seeing big increases in their play rate. Huge reductions though to Gax, to Caliph, again to Jolo, Urclaw, and Scotty. So overall, top legendaries in the game, we've got Fergus, Jinlong, and Prime Sergeant Radic. All very different cards, all requiring very different play styles, but those are very strong cards to build around. Okay, so what we've looked at so far is the cards in a vacuum. We've ranked the cards based on their play rate. We've made the assumption that the more heavily played cards are the stronger cards. But of course, you want your cards to put them together to become something greater than their individual values in the form of a deck. So the next thing we're going to look at is the decks, where we've basically looked at all the cards in the decks, we've figured out the rank of each card, we've averaged the ranks out, and then the decks with the highest or the lowest overall ranks of card are the best decks, in air quotes. And we'll see a lot of similar decks because a lot of the cards are auto includes really in some of these top decks. So the number one deck was this APEP deck, which I think was made by Renzo, or at least seen being played by Renzo. The average rank of the cards in this deck was 13. So we see some cards that we saw very prominent when we looked at the cards and the spells. We saw Jing, one of the heaviest played Legendaries. We've got the lightning bolt, the chain lightning. Sorry, I got confused like Dark Crow there. The chain lightning, very heavily used spell. Scrutillery as well, and rapid response reserves, of course. Similar deck in second, which is the Morelia deck, but same sort of thing. And then we see the next three decks, all starting with Blood Imps and the Heal Puff. So very similar base to those decks. And interestingly, that fifth place one, of course, it does have the red golem, so the Blood Imps are there to try to help that red golem get activated. I've been playing some red golem. There is a video of my game against cats on my YouTube recently. Check that out if you want to see some fun gameplay. Interestingly, that fourth place Ratbow deck has an aimbot, but doesn't seem to have much Outlander tech. So that means that the aimbot's not going to get fully stacked every cycle, which it can work, but it's not necessarily how I like to play it. Remember, it has those two triggers to give you the extra range or the plus the nats. But that, I think that fourth deck was a Dark Crow deck, so we're going to assume that it is pretty good. Right, so those are some top 1v1 decks. Now let's have a look at some top random decks. So this, of course, is where wildcards become playable. But it's interesting to see that only one of these cards has wildcards in it. And sorry, one of these decks, and it's only got one of them. It is the Scrap Pack, though, which is a very heavily played card. And I think that just goes to show that wildcards don't have to be used on a big fancy card to get value out of them. You can see Scrap Pack, most heavily played card in our analysis. Very cheap card, but wildcarding it can get you a lot of value from it. And we can see here a lot of similarities between these decks. We've got a Cleaver in all of them. We've got a Fergus in almost all of them. We see a Chain Lightning in 4 of them. So lots of similarity here, which is kind of to be expected. You know, these are the strongest cards. So the strongest decks are going to be playing the strongest cards. And just a reminder, these are the top decks without repeats of Masters. So I don't want to just show you 5 slightly different APEP decks. So we've got APEP, Morelia, King Puff, Diona, and Volko. And of course, all of those decks and those Masters requiring slightly different play style to get value out of them. So those are our random decks. And we're going to look at our pre-made decks now. Again, wild cards available, but I don't think they're used. We can see here only one of these decks has wild cards, but again, that 5th place deck, Ratbow, it's wild carding not a big fancy legendary unit. It's wild carding a common card, Lost Legionnaires. He's got 3 copies of those, and again, it just goes to show that wild cards are not necessarily in their strongest by just using these on these big cards. They're just on these valuable, cheaper cycle cards. It's very difficult to answer shielded Lost Legionnaires efficiently for 3 mana. Whether that's killing them quickly, getting the bridges back, and that's really the power in that card. And I would definitely like to see the Lost Legionnaires lose some of their copies allowed. There's a reason why people are playing a lot of them, right? Because they're clearly strong. And again, we see a lot of the similar cards. Cleaver in 4 of these decks, Fergus in 4 of these decks, and a lot of the removal spells. Some of these decks kind of just have different removal spells. Kind of comes down to sort of the play rate. Good to see, Setsu there. More spells than the other decks, that, as you would expect with Setsu. So we got King Puff really dominating a lot of the meta, especially in 2v2 after his recent buffs. And of course, Apep is everywhere, Volko, Setsu, and Ratbo. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what is strong in terms of cards, in terms of decks. And that's it. I know we went through a lot. If you need to go back, screenshot it, pause it, whatever you need to do, make sure you check it out. Appreciate you joining me with this. As mentioned earlier in the video, this will be the last in our 1.x version of Minion Masters Meta Analysis. The next version will be Minion Masters 2.0. Reminder, it's launching on December the 12th. Be there. Come join me for our launch stream where we get our hands on 2.0. Remember, this is going to be a prologue, so it's kind of early access. We're going to be giving our feedback, and then as the time develops, the devs will be able to take into account our feedback. Remember, Guild Conquest is being removed. Draft is being changed a little bit. So there's a lot. I do have a 2.0 video outlining a lot of the changes. So make sure you check that out if you want to keep up to date on that. And of course, don't forget the new plushie, Nirvir. The new plushie will become available for sale for a short period of time, a limited period of time, when it launches 2.0 on the 12th of December. Now, we did get a little bit of frustrating news that the mobile release is going to be delayed a little bit. I'm not surprised about that. The time between December the 12th for the prologue launching and the proposed January the 15th or whatever it was seemed very, very short. Because, you know, based on the prologue feedback, the devs were going to need to make changes. That's going to need to end up in the mobile version as well. So there just didn't seem to be time. So that's been delayed a little bit. But hopefully when we get our hands on the mobile version, it will be better than ever. One really important thing, make sure you back up your decks. Everything is going to be copied across to 2.0 except your decks. Your card collections, your cosmetics, your currency, everything like that will go across, but the decks, because of the architecture, I don't know, will not be copied across. You'll start with blank decks. So if you don't back them up, you will lose them. So screenshot them, /CD to copy them. There's a tool out there that Matt made to back them up. So if you want to do that, make sure you do. Otherwise, you're going to start afresh. Or just let them go and start afresh and let this be like a spring clean for your deck collection. And that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today. As always, if you're enjoying the content here in the fish tank, I appreciate you joining. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on anything Minion Masters related. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about the meta? Does it reflect what you're seeing in the game? Is it different? And of course, let me know what you think those 8 unused cards were, and you might get a prize if you're first. You don't have to get them all, just guess 1 or 2 or 3 of them. Who knows? We'll give out some prizes, but that's 8 unused cards. Any other business? Nope, the team here, which is me, say no. I'm bad as fish, and as always, I'm awkwardly waving.